appreciate you all joining. Um, Cedric Rainey and myself, Kenneth Johnson, have both had different conversations and have had a movement put on our heart to kind of answer the same question that many people are answering, to answer the question about what can I actually do? I mean, there are feelings that different people have from various angles, right? Some of them are not going to be the same feelings that we have. But as we look at what starts a grassroots movement, that seeds have to be planted at the very ground level. And for us, we want to take time to make sure that the seeds are based in community and based in relationships. And that begins to be the first step that we can take to make a difference with everything that's going on. So again, I'm introducing myself. I'm Kenneth Johnson. For those of you whom I don't know, Cedric Rainey is my co-host and co-moderator. We have a panel of individuals from around the community in various parts of the country that are going to speak to certain subjects that we journey through. Mark Christie will be joining us as a panelist. Larry Murray will join us as a panelist. Jerry Gardner will join us as a panelist. And we'll have a few other young men to join us. And we just want to create an open forum with guided conversation that everyone can speak to, ask questions, get answers, and just move forward. And so, Cedric, did you have anything that you wanted to lay out first?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for joining. Just to give you a preview of what to expect today, we tried to put a lot of thought into giving you a diversity of topics from various angles. So just to walk through the different parts, the first part, we're going to talk about despair, anger, and action, views of a generation ready for change. The next is navigating a troubled society, modern parenting amidst chaos and economic impact of social unrest. Then we're going to have a more spiritual side, one of Pastor Larry Murray. And then we're waiting for Jerry Gardner to come on. He'll be here by that time, hopefully. And so he's a coach. He's a white coach that deals with a lot of his African-American players. And so he's going to talk about kind of the frustration of, or not even the frustration, but the uncertainty of how you can get involved and how you can make more of an impact, even being, not, another race. And then the last part will be for me. I'm going to walk through, kind of why things are charged the way they're charged. My background is in the law. So I'm going to walk through, first degree, second degree, third degree murder, manslaughter, and kind of give you an idea of why these crimes are getting charged the way that they're charged. And then also kind of suggest some solutions. Each one of us are going to try to suggest some solutions going forward. And we want to make this not just a one-time thing. We're looking to make this a series where we add different parts. And so any questions that you have, again, feel free to post them in the chat. And what I'll do is I'll make sure as soon as I see it, I'll try to get the attention of the moderator, and we'll try to get your questions answered as judiciously as possible. So thank you all for joining again.
All right. So, as Cedric said, we want to start out with despair, anger, action, views of a generation ready for change. And this is a topic that we are seeing unfold in front of our eyes, right? We are seeing a generation that is younger than myself as I approach 40 years old. We're seeing a generation that is younger than Cedric in his 30s. We're seeing a generation that is now in a position where they are entering early adulthood, and they know their history to a certain degree. But if you think about this generation that is entering late teens to early adulthood right now, the same generation that we are seeing on the screens as active protesters, the same generations that we see being arrested, those that are more vocal, those that are more energetic, this generation is a generation that has actually grown up with a regular occurrence of these type of activities. So a lot of what we are seeing right now through this generation is the bubble up of those emotions when they don't have direction on how to handle what they're seeing, but they're ready for change. And so the question often gets asked, what do we do and why? Right? And that's what that generation is asking. So, it's I like to think I'm not far removed from that generation, but I'm a little bit farther than I am. But if there are anyone on the call in that 17 to 25-year-old age range who has questions or has something that you want to say or shed some light on why you feel the way you do, we absolutely would want you to do that right now. So before I take another step, I'm gonna just open it to those in that range who may be on the call to speak up and share what you're feeling.
You don't even know what I'm doing. So shut up.
Hey Ken, why don't we go ahead and is Tequila on the line right now?
I don't see Tequila on the line, but I do know that Caden Gardner may have had some things that he wanted to share as well. Jerry is available.
Yeah, I see Jerry on here. So Coach G, I know you just had the opportunity to join, but we wanted to go ahead and we had you as on the list to start here. So if you don't mind, can you just introduce yourself as a panelist and then, kind of talk about some of the topics that we had scheduled for you?
Yeah, I'm Coach Gardner, or Jerry Gardner. I've been in Plano area or coaching in the DFW area now for 18 years. And I guess a few of the questions that were referred to is how do you support our athletes? What can we do to make sure that we're doing all we can to give them support, to give them the tools, to give them the words on and how to express themselves? And then at the same time, how can you have empathy and compassion whenever there's so many things specifically from my culture that are affecting or having an impact on how they see and view things. So how are those things and what can we do and how can we support making sure that we're using the right words, making sure that we have empathy and compassion. And you helped me out in so much just the other day and making me feel again justifying in the belief and my beliefs and religion and how we go about things in the relationship building. So those are some of the talks that we talked about earlier. And I was hoping he would be on tonight. And it was Braylon Edwards. He was an athlete that I coached last year that he is now in college and he's in that 17 to 25 area. And being able to communicate with him, I was hoping he would be able to get on here. He said he was going to try to. They just started again. There's their campus for North Dakota State for football. But just 2 days ago, one of his teammates was at a protest. And within that protest, it said, "I can't breathe." He had a "I can't breathe" sign up there. And somebody had to chime in and say something about what he was wearing and that he was a joke. And that young man articulated himself so well and kept the composure of a person my age that may not be able to do it at 42, and responded back that I'm sorry that you feel that way. Know that we're going to represent and we're going to take care of things that we feel like with our compassion, and we're going to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to build change. And that was a great answer. And the only thing that I could do to support him is to go over there and again, let's just say he was dancing on Twitter, to tell him how proud I was on how he responded and handled himself maturely and in response to someone that was trying to stir things up. Because that's what, and a lot of this that's going on now is the people that are trying to stir things up and how the media portrays all these negative impacts with people trying to get support and building support together. So I was really proud, and that's just an example that I was hoping he was going to be able to come and talk about on his response about handling things when situations aren't the way that you want them to, when there's injustices going on, and that you're living through that and still being able to handle it in a mature way and be responsible and still support what's right.
Absolutely. And I think that part of this that, maybe goes unspoken is the impact that the past couple of weeks have had on young people of color, et cetera. I know that we have a couple of teachers on here. Before we kind of move on to, maybe the next topic or what have you, does anybody have any ideas or how have you thought best to deal with some of those, the impact from a psychological standpoint on kids and young people. Has anybody experienced that, or what are some of the challenges that people are dealing with now? Just before we move on to the next topic, I want to open up the forum to see if anybody has any ideas or thoughts on that. Go ahead, Dave.
Nice to meet everybody. I'm not a teacher. I'm a mental health counselor that works a lot with the youth. And I believe, just like any other trauma, the trauma that we're currently going through, it's very important to just listen and validate what they're feeling in this moment, depending on whatever it is their truth. So what I try to do is, depending on what is happening, is allow them that opportunity to express what they're feeling. If it's anger, if it's sadness, if it's frustration, it's what they're feeling, because it's what they're living. And just like trauma, it's important to offer that support, validate those feelings, and just try to assist them the best you can. It's difficult, but empathy and the power of just trying to learn to understand, because I'll never understand. I would be a liar if I said I would. So it's just trying to learn a little bit more and learn a little bit better.
Do we have any other, before we move on to the economic input? Marcus, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
So the one thing, I brought this up to you the other day when we were speaking directly, but it's challenging to imagine that the school environment was the safe environment for the younger generation in some cases. And recognizing that my dilemma was that being a teacher and a yoga teacher who teaches in Baltimore City public schools, that disconnect not only leaves them with an absence of education in their day, but an absence of support, an absence of psychological relief, in a sense. Me being a yoga teacher, like, I see what they let off in that class in that 45 minutes we spend together. So the thing that I'm remembering, and that has come to me just today, is that remember what they are spending their time doing instead. There's a young man that lives upstairs. He spends most of his day on the internet now. And if you think about children in middle school, high school age, 90% of their time is spent on social media. So before we go and put, like, today is a potent day for me, because as everyone is thinking about what they're putting out on social media, I think that some of us who deal with children have a slightly different perspective, because we have to remember that it can't all be negative. It can't all be about what exactly, although we are frustrated, although we are angry, although we feel all these things as adults, we have to remember that if that's all you show children, they watch what we do, not what we say. So if we put that out in front of them, we're going to create a generation of individuals who are too angry and emotional to deal with any of this. So the whole thing that I've been doing this week is continuing with the challenge I created, which is about, the hashtag for the challenge is I Can Breathe. It is simply direct, positive messaging that is combating the message that's been put out, that young Black and brown children are witnessing what the message they're getting from their country and from the society that's being put out on social media. And they need something to counterbalance that so they don't lose hope completely, or else they won't be able to fight these types of issues. And that's just where I've come to as of today.
So Marcus, I think that's a great point. And the point of I Can Breathe kind of segues into a question that came up in the forum. And that question is from Montoya. Hey, Montoya. And
that's my sister-in-law.
Chris is there, and the girls too. But the question is, how can we start having these conversations with our kids in these late adolescents to get them to understand what impact they have? So I'm going to take a swing at that, and then I'm going to throw it over to Mark Christie, as he has children in that age range. But for me, I have children that are in that age range, and I have a child below that age range. And that's where the positive messaging becomes critical. The message of I can breathe, because you have to have the conversation in truth. And one of the things that has taken place in our society through the introduction of social media is the decline of family time. the decline of dinner time conversations, the decline of breakfast time conversations, where most of us would have had these types of conversations. One approach could be to scale back and have deviceless time, or have pretty intentional time with your children, whether they're beneath the adolescent age or in the adolescent age range or even above, on these topics. And I found it beneficial from our standpoint to not sugarcoat it. You filter it for what they can handle at their developmental stage, but the truth is always going to be the truth. And if you shield them from the truth, you're doing them a greater disservice than you are protecting them. So you start those conversations in truth and support it with positivity, and that's how you get them to understand the impact that they have on what's going on around them. But Mark, I'd be interested in your take before we move on to the next topic.
And Mark, while you're at it, go ahead and segue into your topic that you were going to speak about anyway.
Very good, very good. Well, thank everybody for, first of all, thank you, Ken and Cedric, for organizing this and asking me to participate, and thanks everybody who joined in. And yes, my youngest child is 17 years old. He'll be a senior starting in August. My two oldest, one just graduated from SMU, and the other one has been out of school 2 years. And both of the older girls have been active in what's going on here. And the younger guy, he's inquired. Personally, I'm not afraid of him going out. I didn't want to go out with him. I just felt like personally, I just was a little too angry to be a good example for him. This is trauma, right? That are experiencing trauma. Am I muted? Does everybody hear me? Can folks hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I had a message that said, okay, there we go. So, once you experience trauma, talk therapy is the best thing to start to happen. And so, as Marcus said, man, I can tell he's well trained. The beginning of talk therapy is listening. You've got to really listen to what their thoughts are. I probe my son every day, at least 4 times a day, even before this. Hey, man, what's going on? Hey, man, how you feeling? Hey, man, what happened at school? And, he's a teenage male. He likes to give me that one-word answer, but I got to keep poking because he needs to exhale. If he doesn't exhale, he will explode. There's a difference between adolescent males and adolescent females. My 2 oldest are girls. There was no problem getting them to communicate what was going on inside their emotions. No problem whatsoever. With the male, I have to dig and dig because he will go in his room and he will just emote internally, and I'll find out that there's something wrong when it gets expressed in a negative behavior. So as we deal with the females, they're going to let you know, be open to hear. When you're dealing with the males, you must sit them down and poke and prod. It's very important that they get out what those feelings are. And then, you've got to be, and this is tough because when you're parenting, you want to direct a young person. But Marcus can attest to this, in counseling, you're not supposed to give the answer, right? You're supposed to kind of keep asking questions until they discover the answer. And so, those are just some skills that you have to practice and continue to apply as you're dealing with these young folk, because they are highly intelligent and they've got access to much more information than we did in my generation. So I hope that answered, that was just my response to that. Now I'm going to segue into what I was asked to talk about this evening. the topic is kind of navigating a troubled society. This is, I never thought, well, first of all, let me set some context. I'm 55 years old. I was born and raised in Hartford, Connecticut, which is the capital city. Hartford is the capital city of Connecticut. I'm an East Coast guy. I've lived, 3 years of my college experience in Virginia, 2 years of my college experience in Boston. All of my children were born in Philadelphia. After marriage, we lived there for 13 years. Now we're going on 13 here in McKinney. So I've had an opportunity to see a lot of different parts of these United States of America. And I will tell you this, the first they wanted me to talk about, the experience past versus present. And I'm going to be honest with y'all, I got stuck, right? As I started to just kind of think, what am I going to say? I got stuck. And as I thought about what to share, this is what I want to share with y'all. 1992, Rodney King. 1999, Amadou Diallo. 2006, Sean Bell. 2009, Oscar Grant. 2012, Trayvon Martin. 2014, Michael Brown, Eric Gardner. 2015, Sandra Bland. 2016, Philando Castile. Keith Scott. 2019, Botham Jean. 2020, George Floyd. Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, right? So if we go back to 92 and we look at 2020, there's no difference, right? There's nothing different in the last 2-3 decades, man. So when we talk about experiences, past or present, man, we're in the same deal that we've been in for the last 30, 40 years. And so next thing they wanted me to talk about, briefly, historical, oral historical tradition. I think part of why we keep running around in this cycle is because we've lost kind of the traditions of the ancients, man. We've lost the traditions of our ancestors, which was sitting down and this oral history being communicated over and over and over again through songs, through poems, through, at the family reunion, we don't just do the electric slide. You got one of the elders sitting down and talking about the journey of the ancestors. We stopped doing that. And so we've got a young people and we've got generations that are disconnected, including, I had to come to terms with this and I responded today and, kind of brought some tears to my eyes, man. I'm responsible for the problem and partly, and I'm going to explain my perspective. So I told you I was 55. So I'm a direct result. I'm a direct result of affirmative action. I was 5 years old. I took a test. I scored pretty high and they said, oh, here's a talented young Black kid. We're coming out of civil rights. Man, let's get him on the track to these exclusive private schools. And man, it took my life. I've studied at Tufts University. I've studied at Columbia B School. I've studied at SMU Cox. I worked on Wall Street at Kidder Peabody. And I'm from the hood. My older brother's a felon. My mother was a nurse's aide. My father came from Jamaica to pick tobacco in Connecticut. All right. So affirmative action helped me. But what it did was it lulled me to sleep. I have to admit, man, it lulled me to sleep. And I got intoxicated on chasing this thing called the American dream. And I forgot that I was from the hood. And I just saw I had to go chase this thing. So, man, I can't go back and live in my community. I can't go back and connect. Man, I'm not going to be a part of that. And I'm definitely not going to raise my kids to be anywhere around that hood stuff. And all I did in that wrong thinking was to help create the divide and this chasm and this separation, and the disconnect of me as a part of the talented tenth. I stepped away from my community. And so, I have to own that, y'all. Times like this cause you to go deep inside yourself and to really see what you're doing. We can't allow that to happen. There's going to be things that are going to come out of this tension that we're facing in America, and there's going to be a lot of positive I see police reform, one of the things that will happen, right? But now once that happens, we can't let the generation that's the direct benefit get intoxicated with the new era and not connect back to the troubled situation that they may leave behind as the new era launches them into, a different condition.
So Mark, I've got a question for you on that. As you talk about this change, we talk about the importance of oracle and historical tradition versus what is there going forward and what things will look like going forward. One of the questions that's out there is, as a parent, how do you prepare your kids to speak up on things like this? How do you give them the confidence to speak up against wrongdoing and what's right? But then also, how do you face the fears that come with preparing your children?
Number one, you have to get rid of your fear, right? As a parent, you've got to be fearless, and you've just got to share the truth with your child, and you must train them, encourage, coach them into, by any means, whatever the price, stand up for what's right. I'm going to tell you guys, a lot of you don't know me, but I'm going to share a personal story. It involves my son, Marcus. Last summer, I'm not going to name the school. I don't want to get any trouble for people saying I was bashing the school, but last summer he was in strength and conditioning training at his school, and they had a few of the African-American guys that were really big and dark-skinned. They had them pose with no shirt on, and they put those workout chains around their necks, and they took a picture and they posted it on social media. And when my son and I saw it, we talked about it. He went back to strength and conditioning the next day, and he said, "Hey guys, look, man, we've got to be careful. We're trying to go to college, and colleges look at social media, and you don't want to give them the impression that you may be kind of a dangerous element coming on campus. So we probably don't want to have pictures like this." Separately, I talked to the head coach in a private text and said, "Hey, as a 55-year-old African-American man, that's kind of offensive because those brothers look like young bucks on the auction block. And I just, it's cool if you want to do it in the locker room, but man, you can't post that on social media." And as a result, through the coaching staff, it was communicated that my son was to never play one down in a varsity game. So he's probably the second fastest guy on the team. Ken, you can attest to his speed. You see his physical stature and his size. He never got one rep. And it was all the result of, because he said he got so much backlash. And so what I had to do is encourage him, like, "Hey man, you said the right thing." And it's funny, now I tell him, like, "Remember you said that a year ago? And now look at what's going on real time in society today." They'll never apologize to you, son, but I want you to acknowledge that, you were taught inside the house the right thing. So that's just a personal account for what happens when, you kind of share with your kids to do what's right. In a culture, in a system that isn't doing right, there will be pushback, but gird them up. They got to be strong, because at the end of the day, whether you call him Allah, whether you call him Jesus, the one and only true and living God will stand for the righteous.
Look, that's a good, there's a lot to unpack there, but there's a piece that I heard that I want to touch on before we kick to our next topic. And there's a question that came out of the forum. And so when you talk about the image that was portrayed with your son and the other athletes looking at the young bucks on the auction block, I can see that. So if you look at what's going on in the country, there are images that people consume and that people then have of a certain race. And in turn starts to form racist tendencies in this country. And people who have those racist tendencies matriculate many times into the police force. Just call it what it is. And so now there appears to be the militarization of police forces in this country, but its ranks are filled with people who have an ardent view or a biased view rooted in racism. So, I want to put this out to everyone, right? Not just, the panel, but everyone else. How do we move past creating those views, but also how can we fix the matriculation of people with those views into our police force, into our local government, and we'll get on the local government topic a little bit later. But how do we fix that? And that's a very good question that's out there.
Hey, go ahead.
Before you go, Cedric, real quick, Ken, one of my mentors told me something that's very, very important and pertinent to your question. He said, you can only replace a wrong idea with a better idea. And so, media versus whether it's news or social, those are all ideas floating around, man. And you've got to, one, fix your filter. And then we got to reprogram some people, man. Propaganda is programming folks. I mentioned Rodney King. Some of you younger folk don't remember this, but you could see on the film they were beating this dude, and they were saying you didn't see him getting beat. And so the more they say he didn't get beat, people actually started to believe that Rodney King didn't get beaten. And so, the programming of the subconscious thought life is a powerful thing. And we're never really taught how our brain works. They keep that away from us. If you know how your brain works, you will guard your eye gate, you will guard your ear gate, and you will do your best to control what experiences you and your children have.
Hey, somebody who I think is extremely relevant to this topic is one of my mentors. His name is Waverly Kelly. Just to give you a little bit of background, his father was a civil rights leader, a powerhouse. There's actually a video of him in Selma, Alabama, standing in front of the people, talking to the sheriff, asking him, are my people not as good as your people? Am I not the same person as you are? So I would like to go ahead and kick it to Wade and kind of give a little wrap up from perspective of a historian, but not only that, but the bloodline of civil rights royalty, if you will.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks, Ed, for the opportunity. I'm happy to be here with you guys. As he said, I am the splitting image of my father. And to just kind of piggyback on what Brother Mark said, when you grow up outside of that relevance and understanding, it can lull you to sleep until something happens. I'm not as old as my brother Mark, but I remember Rodney King as well. I was 11 years old when that Rodney King issue happened. And he clearly was beaten. And they tried to tell you otherwise. And it struck a chord in me and said, something's got to be done. And here we are almost, 20 years later, and we're dealing with the same problem. I would say that in order to really understand and make credible change, there are a couple of things that have to happen. The first thing that has to absolutely happen is that we have to get rid of our need for convenience. The Montgomery bus boycott is teaching tape on what happens when a people get rid of their convenience. What do I mean by that? You had grandma, you had grandpa, you had down to the little bitty babies that were walking the streets every day until there was effective, credible, notable change. Now, there's always one color that will trump black or white, and that's green. When those boys saw those profit and loss statements from folks deciding that they were going to walk and walk and walk again and walk some more, they decided this is not advantageous for my business. I have to do something. The loss of convenience gave way to credible change. That has to be a part of navigating.
Hey, Wave, I think you cut out.
Can you hear me? Are you with me?
Now we with you.
Okay. I know you like your nice, fine conveniences. I do too. But in order to affect credible change, we have to be in a position to lose those. No greater example than Colin Kaepernick. Colin put it all out on the line years before. He didn't lose his job because he wasn't a skillful player. He didn't lose his job because he had contract demands. He didn't lose his job because of anything other than taking an unpopular position and staying with that so that he could be known and so that the movement could be known. The second thing that we have to do, and I'm piggybacking a lot off of Brother Mark tonight because he hit some things. The second thing that I really believe that we have to do is that we have to take responsibility for educating our children ourselves. When you look at the school systems and when you look at what is taught in school books, it is not, and I repeat that, it is not our history. I like to say it this way. And no offense to my white brother that may be on here, white brothers that may be on here, but I can get a PhD. Let me say it this way. I can't get a GED without learning about their history. But they can get a PhD without learning about mine. So we have to take responsibility and teach our history. I got in trouble in 8th grade because I told the teacher that my history didn't start with slavery. I got in tremendous trouble because I told them my history didn't start with slavery. That's your history of where I fall in line with this agenda, but that is not my history. So we got to take responsibility to make sure that we educate our children, that we have conversations other than about the police. And I don't want to belabor the time, but the third thing is we got to put our money up. We have to put our money up. It sounds like the first point I made, but it's really not. The first point is about convenience. The third point is about putting our money up. When you look at that black dollar and brown dollar, it is what, $10 billion a day? If we were to do the math, something like that. What happens if we decide to put our money up and only buy those things that are absolutely essential to our survival? Somebody's going to come looking for us. And when they come looking for us, we're going to have a list of demands that say, this is what we need from you. This is what we need from you. And then you take that money and you redirect it into politics. And you say, if you want to win this election, if you want to be representative in this district or this state, if you want to do this, then you have to follow this agenda. Whether I hate to say it this way, whether we buy a politician or rent one, because you know that happens, we make that decision and we move in that direction with one voice. And my last point is, we don't have a Martin and we don't have a Malcolm. And so my prayer as a pastor is that God would raise up one who is credible and viable, who can take all of these societal ills and package them in a way that Martin did, that Malcolm did, so that when the light shines on us fully, outside of protest and outside of all these other things that are going on right now, we will be able to be credible and viable and not be embarrassed. That's my take. I'm here for questions. Said, thank you so much, man, for having me, and we can go from there. God bless.
So I appreciate that, Waverly, and we're going to take some questions, but there are some things being said in the forum too that I think are worth mentioning. And one of the things is that said is history is always recorded by the victors, and that's true. And so it reminds me of a situation that I had with my own son as he began to learn about the American Revolution. But we teach true history here at home, and he was upset. I had to prep him before he went to school so that he didn't get himself in trouble. He wanted to know why his social studies book didn't talk about the blacks who were involved in the American Revolution, specifically why his social studies book preached patriotism but didn't talk about Crispus Attucks being the first black man, being one of the first people to be killed in the American Revolution, fighting for an America that really wasn't his, right? And that bothered him to a point where he had to calm him before going. So I think, my question is really not just to you, Waverly, but to those others that are in the forum and that are on the call that are educators. Are there things that keep you from providing education beyond the textbook of history that you know to be true, or is it history that you don't know that you could be educated on, that you could then use to enhance what you're teaching already? So I'm not gonna put anybody, well, I am gonna put somebody on the spot. This may get me in trouble later, but I'm gonna put my wife on the spot, who's an educator as well.
Hello, I wasn't supposed to be on the program. The thing I think that may keep people from educating the kids on this is, one, ignorance and lack of knowledge about it, but also the fear of doing it's not in the curriculum. Let's just be honest, and especially in Texas, they're not interested in hearing our history in this state, and so you have to fear basically getting in trouble for adding these things in, and parents, who aren't open to hearing those things that don't fit the narrative that we typically hear in our education system as what is supposed to be history. So I think it's a mixture of ignorance about it. I mean, because you have to think, if you're a Caucasian teacher, have you necessarily gone and educated yourself on African American history? So you have that ignorance, and you also have the fear of going outside of the curriculum and the repercussions that could cause.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So my thoughts on this, I'm gonna get in trouble for that later, y'all. But my thoughts on that point, they segue back into the larger issues that we're faced with today, and it is that the total history, the total level of education. We have to remember the same individuals who don't get this education, or they get some version of the education, but they get that version of the education as a way to suppress, or the same individuals that are engaged in our lawmaking society. They're the same individuals that are engaging in law enforcement, right? And so when you look at things like that, how can we take a stance? And that's just an open question for anybody. And it may be something you go back to your bedroom and think about tonight. But how can we take a stance to push for the right level of education? Because I'm going to be completely honest, there are different, just as we're having the discussion on what gets taught in the four walls of our house, there are different things that are being taught in the four walls of other houses. How do we get to the single truth so that we don't repeat our past, and that we understand, so that these individuals who are committing these heinous infractions, who are likely not educated on some of these things, maybe have a prick in their heart, or have a change of heart that starts them to pull back from these type of acts?
Well, Ken, if I may, some things we've got to do what we know is right, and then we've got to leave the rest to the Creator, right? He's in charge. He's running the show. We're not really in control. Just leave it to him and move with his ebbs and flows. But one thing on this education piece that I want to kind of lay out for the forum, because I'm 55 years old, I can say this: there are incredible dysfunctions in the African American community. We are a dysfunctional people. Our families are fractured, right? Our families are fractured, but they're not fractured because as people, we just wanted to be ignorant about the value of family. It might appear that way, but because I'm 55, I remember when the social worker used to come and do house visits, right? And the social worker would knock on your door, come inside your crib. And if you were a woman and you were getting WIC, let's say, food stamps, and that social worker came inside that apartment and saw the presence of a man, your benefits would be cut. So the systemic result was, I can get more money for the kids if I pull the father out of the household. So certain things, dysfunctions, happen to us as a result of systemic forces. And once again, folk like me that got educated, it was a benefit inside the company. Man, listen, when I worked at Kidder Peabody, dude, I had to do what everybody in Kidder Peabody did. You embrace the culture, or you wouldn't go from associate to VP. So, I wore the suspenders, I wore the Brooks Brothers suits and the shoes. And I joined the proper health club, and I lived in the right neighborhood. You just had to do those things. So guess what? Now I'm leaving my community because these systemic forces are saying, hey, if you don't have this look and this profile, Christy, we're not going to allow you to succeed in our system. So the separation of the family and then pulling out the talented 10th, man, caused some serious dysfunctions in our community.
Hey, Coach G, I saw that you would unmute yourself. So we'll go to you, and then we want to try to keep this thing under like an hour, 20 minutes or so. So we'll go to you, Coach G, and then Larry is a pastor, and we'll have Larry kind of speak to the religious side. Go ahead, Coach G.
Yeah, the first thing, Ken, I want to say thank you to your wife. I'm Native American as well, and there's a big part that we lose with history that's brought up with how our culture and things transpired to where they are. And I would only say this. I went through a situation with a school district here recently, and there were things that were going on within that school district that were unconscionable, that you would never think that they would ever be allowed at a school. But what makes them feel the most uncomfortable is when you have ratification and you have unification of people that are set. And what I mean by that right now, And the state of Texas does a good job of teaching, but they lock teachers in on some things with the requirements for the testing, that everything's based off of testing. And the only thing I would say is with groups and cultures need to be in there, because I would love to hear more about the African-American history, because I don't know. She's correct. I don't know anything about it. I know about the Native American. And the only thing that I've been able to do is to have group discussions to allow those different experiences to be taught out there. But really, it starts at the top. And when people will come together and say that we need this in, it needs to be within the statutes, that we're talking about certain histories, it needs to be in there. And that's the only way it's a movement, with a group of people saying that we need to put this in there. And when you're talking about new laws being written, right now is a great opportunity for people to step up and say, these things need to be done. We understand that you have a certain amount of history that needs to be taught, but the most important thing for us to understand is where other people come from, so we have an understanding of when we have differences from the other person's side of view. And if you don't have that ability, then you can't rationalize the other side's opinion or views. And I would like to be on that movement or group if we have the opportunity, if you guys decide to do that, because that would be important. It's something that's missing with our youth.
Great. Hey, wonderful, man. This is a wonderful conversation we've been having so far. We're going to move on to the next topic. Larry, we're going to go ahead and bring you in. Like I said, folks, we want to try to keep this under an hour, 20 minutes or so. So we got about 20 more minutes to go. So appreciate everyone's input so far. And we'll have maybe like a little question and answer session at the end when everybody starts logging off. But without further ado, Larry Murray.
Hey, so I'm a pastor and I got the last 20 minutes.
Well, you actually get you got about 15 minutes, and I'm going to take about 5 minutes to do the reading part. Go ahead.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No. Hey, several things I want to say just up front, as others have. Thanks for letting me join you guys and being here. And to my friends of color, I just want to apologize and say I'm sorry for all that you are experiencing that I cannot comprehend. Just the fear, anger, fill in the blank, whatever it is. I know that I just don't get it. I want to, and I know many others do as well. And so I even feel a bit odd talking, because I feel like my primary thing I need to do right now is listen, unless I'm talking to my friends who are white and bringing them along. As a pastor and as a Christian, not just in culture, but as a follower of Jesus, I recognize that a lot of even just the history that y'all were talking about just a minute ago, Christianity is on the wrong side of that, of colonialism and, just what came out of Europe in the founding of our country, immediately stealing land from those who were already here. We didn't discover this country, we stole it. Just some of those things, how we treated Native Americans during, the Lincoln administration. He had the 13th Amendment, great 13th Amendment, but he also committed the greatest genocide in our country with Native Americans. And so with that kind of foundation, with slavery and all those things, I don't think we can move forward without having a realistic view. And maybe what I mean by that is a shared history, not two different histories, a white history and a African-American history or whatever it might be, but a shared history. And that's what I think we're at right now, where we've got some great opportunities that I see forces at work to try and divide us. But I also see a lot of unity of us coming together and saying, hey, let's agree on history. Let's agree on what happened this week and today, and let's move forward together. And so, there's a lot more I could say about that, but just want to say I'm sorry, and I want to learn, and I want to have an impact. This isn't necessarily a new thing for me. Probably where my heart began to change and I began to get more involved was almost 6 years ago with Michael Brown in Ferguson. That's where I started meeting with some other pastors, a diverse group of guys, Latinos, Asians, African Americans, and we started meeting just to develop friendships. And we ended up forming kind of a group called Threaded. They got a website, wearethreaded.org. And with that, our purpose, we exist to inspire relationships, to bring about racial reconciliation, and to have some collaborative action amongst the diverse body of Christ. And so, seeing that things are going on, some of the first things that I did last week when things about George Floyd came out was sent a text to several of my friends that said, "Hey, how are you doing?" And I could tell immediately, "Hey, this is going to be really hard." And so with this, I'm not necessarily looking for a platform to speak in those things. I just want to make friends where together we can agree on our shared history and have some shared experiences and say, let's move on and do better. Even though we've been dealing with this for 300-400 years, maybe back to the 1500s. Some degree we could go all the way back to Constantine, but I won't go there. But there is a long history. And so part of my lament throughout the day in some other spaces has been, how long, Lord? How long is this going to continue? And my faith and belief in the scriptures say that one day God's going to make all things new. But until then, that doesn't mean I just throw up our hands and say, well, there's nothing I can do and become passive or disinterested. Say, no, God has left us here, and I am here for the purpose of reconciling people with God through a relationship with Jesus by faith, and reconciling people with each other, righting wrongs, standing for justice. And that's what I see. God is not an angry policeman. He's a God of justice, and one who loved us so much that he sent his son to become justice for us, that he took our place. And that's kind of what I see our role is. A lot of people that around me know I have kind of a definition of love that I think comes from scripture and the example of Jesus. And it goes something like this, that love gives others what they need the most when they deserve it the least at the greatest personal cost. That love isn't just an emotion. It's not a feel-good kind of thing. It's not a, hey, let's come together. No, love means sacrifice. And perhaps our country just says, we want to feel good about each other. We don't really want to serve each other. And we sure don't want to sacrifice for each other. But that's exactly what God did for me and for the world when he sent Jesus to give us what we needed the most, when because of our sin and our racism, our selfishness, we deserved it the least. And it cost God his son. That's what I believe. That's what I think that the scriptures teach. And I want to live that. I'm not perfect. And I want to be a part of this to show the world that, hey, it can be better. And we can do this not by our own strength, not by our own ability to love, not even by our own friendships. But we do this by the power of God that is here among us. I know not all of you are Christians, and I'm not trying to convert anybody. I'm just saying, hey, here's where I am. Here's how I'm trying to live it. And want to do that. And I'm glad to make some new friends and want to continue these things of us talking and sharing life together beyond just social media kind of things, for us to do something about this world and this mess that's been going on for a long, long, long time.
Larry, before we let you off the hook, because you dropped a few bombs in there, man, and you said some things that are true, and they're hard for people to swallow, but they're absolutely true. But before we go and kick it over to Cedric, one of the things that I wanted to get your thoughts on, that a lot of people who may not be people of color have, and some people of color have a complex, or they're trying to figure out, is, spiritually, what is my responsibility? And I think when we planned, we talked about complacency versus responsibility, biblical action versus social action. But where those two intersect, and what is, complacency versus responsibility in this situation?
Yeah. Well, I think the responsibility is that we're all made in the image of God, that we're all people. We're all here together. And, some of the things that Martin Luther King said were, injustice. I'm probably not going to get it right, so y'all correct me, but injustice somewhere is injustice everywhere. Paraphrase. And so from that standpoint, we've got the responsibility of caring for each other. And, one of the things that has been really difficult this week, I think for a lot of us, is for us to see the Bible being held up in several different places. And it's just kind of made us sick. And I'm not talking about just one person. I've seen several do it. And to kind of wave a Bible around and use it as a weapon rather than its intention of us caring for other people in the way that we've been loved and cared for. I think that's there, and it's the heart of Scripture. What's the greatest commandment? God says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and heart, soul, mind, and soul. Oh, I'm getting it wrong, but what I'm saying. And the second command is to love your neighbor as yourself. It doesn't get any more clear than that. But then when we start putting qualifiers on that of who is my neighbor and why they deserve or don't deserve my love and my care and my sacrifice, that's where it begins to break down, where we start just thinking about ourselves.
I want to add something to what Pastor Larry just said, if you don't mind. As a pastor, I wrote on Facebook the other day, and this piggybacks directly off of what Pastor just said. I said, all we really want is for the book of Philemon to be lived out in our present day. Just really briefly, for those of you who may not know what the book of Philemon is, Philemon had a guy by the name of Onesimus who was a slave, and he ran away from him. And when he ran away from him, he caught up with Paul, and he was converted. And so Paul told Onesimus, you got to go back. That's the only right thing to do. But when you go back, you're not going back a slave. So he wrote this letter to Philemon and said, hey, he has converted. You owe me some favors. And on the grace that I've given you over this time, I want you to treat him as if you would treat me. He's coming back to you because that's right to do. But when he comes back, he's no longer a slave. And I wrote there, I am Onesimus. How will you treat me now that I'm no longer a slave? This is a critical question across the spectrum of religion, period, not just Christianity. And to weaponize our faith as Christians, in particular, holding up our holy writ is unconscionable. And so we have to stand against that, and we have to make sure that people understand that God, John 3:17 said he didn't come into the world to condemn the world, but through him the world may be saved. And so I wanted to drop that out there. Anytime you hear people talk about the social justice is not a part of the Bible, they are a liar, period. No question about it. It is right there for everyone to read, and it begs the question that the guy asked, well, who is my neighbor? And then he goes into a certain man went down from Jerusalem and fell, but I won't preach. You can read it yourself.
Appreciate that, ladies. So now, I'm going to toss it over to Cedric because we could go on a lot of things. But one of the, I keep saying Cedric. I'm going to address him properly. Cedric Rainey, Esquire. Um, and there's a lot of legal ramifications with what we've been seeing. And so Cedric is going to take us through really some of the laws in the state of Minnesota, but then how that impacts the convictions or lack of convictions, or different type of convictions, or different type of indictments that have been brought up. So Cedric, I'm going to turn it over to you, and Cedric will display a screen so that we can walk through some key legal points.
Can everybody see my screen? Just give me a thumbs up if you can. Oops. Everybody can see my screen? Okay, good. Okay, so it's small. Okay, let's see. I did this full screen. Is that better? No? Okay. What is it coming across as? Is this coming across super small?
Just small, kind of a narrow swath.
Huh. All right, give me one second. Let me try this again. Hold on, I'm sorry about that. Let's see. That's still the same? Okay, better. Okay, whew, thank goodness. All right. So I want to walk everybody through. I know that one of the things that's most frustrating for people is that when an officer is charged, or in the case of Trayvon Martin, a security personnel or someone like that is charged, people always want, and rightfully so, the book to be thrown at them. And we understand for various emotional reasons. My goal tonight is to take you through the statute. I know many people don't get a chance to actually look at the statute, but I'm going to take you through what is first-degree murder, what is second-degree murder, what is third-degree murder, and then what is manslaughter, and why all these folks are being charged the way that they're being charged. So in the case of the Minneapolis killing, the gentleman there was charged with third-degree murder. And many people want to know why he was charged with third-degree murder. So I want to talk to you about two concepts first. The first one is, it's called mens rea, and the second one is called actus reus. So mens rea, or actus reus, is the actual act, the killing act. That is in just about every crime that you're going to find. But there's a mens rea component, which is the mental component, the intent component that goes with every crime and how they're charged. And this is where the distinction is. So what I have here is a statute in Minnesota, and it's the first-degree murder statute. And what it says is, whoever does any of the following is guilty of murder in the first degree and shall be sentenced to imprisonment for life if they causes the death of a human being with, and the operative word here is premeditation, and in some places it says premeditation and deliberation, but here it says with premeditation and intent to effect, which means that when he, the fact pattern would have had to been is that when he got to the scene, he knew who he was going to kill, and he intended to kill that person. And I think that the facts, and looking at them, it's hard to say that, they may have known each other, and there's some facts coming out, but it's hard to say that when they got there to the scene, that he intended to kill that person. An example of when charging first-degree murder goes wrong is Trayvon Martin. The prosecutor in that case tried to make the case that when he got on the scene and when he saw Trayvon Martin, that he intended to go kill him. And the facts the jury found were not there to prove that. And so this goes to the problem that we're seeing, whether it's purposely or unintentionally, is what's called overcharging. And when you overcharge, some DAs do this intentionally because they know that they can get the person off, because they know that they can't prove premeditation and deliberation. So that thought in mind, let's move to second-degree murder. So it says that a person, whoever does any of the following is guilty of murder in the second degree and may be sentenced to imprisonment for not more than 40 years. So as you see, the first one was life. Now we're dealing with 40 years. If they cause the death of a human being with intent to effect the death of that person or another, but without premeditation. And so the argument here, I think, is it goes to the question of, well, they may have known each other. Some of the facts are showing that they may have known each other, that there may have been some animosity. There was a video that came out of them beating him up in the car before they put their knee on his neck. And so I think, me personally, that maybe the appropriate charge, if all the facts bear true, is going to be more than likely second degree. But let me tell you why I think third degree was charged here, and that's why I think it's appropriate, is not because I think that the elements are not there to prove second degree murder. I certainly do. But let's go to the third degree murder statute, and it says, whoever without intent to effect the death of any person cause the death of another by perpetuating an imminently dangerous, or an act imminently dangerous to others, and evincing a depraved mind without regard for human life, is guilty of murder in the third degree and may be sentenced for imprisonment not more than 25 years. This is what's called in the law gross negligence. You know that based on your actions, you can cause the death of another person, but you continue and press on anyway. And so if you look at the facts in a lot of these cases, when you're dealing with police officers, there's always plausible deniability with the police officer that they can always say, or the case of the black man that ventures into the neighborhood at night or something like that, they can always come back to this second degree murder statute and say, you know, I didn't have any intent, it was self-defense. Well, when you charge someone with third degree, what you're doing is you're taking that element out of it, that intent element. And what you're saying is, when you picked up that gun, you did it in a reckless manner, and causing it to discharge and kill another person is sufficient enough to where you're not going to get. Now, notice it says not more than 25 years. So the trade-off that we have to accept, if we're going to start getting these convictions, because that's what the point is right now. We just got to get convictions, because these guys are getting off with absolutely nothing, or they're getting off with innocent verdicts. We have to accept that we may not get 40 years. We may not get life in prison. But if we're able to get not more than 25 years, as close to 25 years as we can on some of these charges, that in itself is a victory. So when your friends or your family are you know, they're very upset, understandably emotional about the fact that this person was charged with third degree and then the lesser degree is manslaughter, just understand that the fact first that charges are even being brought in the first place is a victory. And secondly, you know, we have to understand that because it's a police officer and they have that plausible deniability, you know, this reckless concept is one that I think, you know, many more DAs, if we're going to start seeing convictions, many more DAs need to rest their laurels on, because that is much easier to prove. Well, not easier, but you know what I mean. So another example that I'll give you, and I have two of them, which one is Trayvon Martin. The other one was Freddie Gray in Baltimore. So what happened with Freddie Gray is they arrested Freddie Gray. They didn't necessarily have good reason to arrest Freddie Gray. They put him in the back of a van, and Freddie Gray, from what they were saying is Freddie Gray, you know, was beat around or whatever in the van. I think that might not be exactly what happened, but the prosecutor in that case charged them with second degree murder, which is very simple. All these murder statutes are pretty much the same. And so what the jury in that case could not find is the intent element. And so with officers with that plausible deniability aspect, we have to start charging them with murder sufficient to where we don't have to prove the intent element. And that's how we move forward in the judicial system with getting more results. Now, it might not be as long, and we might not be able to throw the book, and you might have to explain to your friends and family that, you know, this is why we're doing it. But I think that third degree murder, until we can build a foundation, third degree and manslaughter, which is like negligent, basically, negligent homicide. I think that those are going to be appropriate charges moving forward. So it's something to pay attention to. And if you see a district attorney charging them with first degree murder, I would be extremely, extremely suspicious. So then the last point that I have is one of the, what can we do and where can we go? And one of my good friends and one of my legal scholars, honestly, one of the brightest legal minds my age that I know, he suggested that we start looking at, or how can we fix this at a local and a state level, is that we start strengthening what's called aiding and abetting, right? And so aiding and abetting generally is more focused on an intent, right? So, you know, you help someone commit this crime. And the key element in that would need to be changed in order for us to hold the other 3 officers that were sitting there while he was kneeling on his neck. The way we need to hold them accountable is, let's go back through the statute. Was it first degree? No, definitely not. For the other 3 is what I'm saying. Was it intentional? Do we have that element? No, we don't have that intentional element. Do we have that reckless element? Well, I don't think so, because in that case, the failure to act is not a crime, and that's what we are charging them, or we want to charge them with. So if you look at this aiding and abetting statute, the operative word that we have to fight, and it's crazy that it's just one word, is intentionally aids. That's it. If you put a U in, or intentionally or unintentionally aids, that will take care, I believe. And what has been suggested to me, and I think that this is just an initial conversation, but if we can add take out the intentional element and put it and really specify first that this is just for those who are operating under the color of law. So officers, this is not unchecked liability for everybody. But if you're an officer, and if it's true, like they say, there are only some bad apples, then for the other ones who are not bad apples, they will be charged with liability if they don't act. If those other 3 officers don't pull that officer off their neck, that's when they become liable. And I think that it's appropriate, because if you're given the authority to defend yourself and take someone's life, if you feel that it's appropriate, then it's also appropriate that when somebody else's life is taken and you fail to act, that you're also held accountable. And so this is just an initial conversation, but from a state, local DA perspective, this is kind of what I think and what was suggested to me would be probably the best way to strengthen the officers, not necessarily the officer that is acting, but in this case, it would be the other officers that failed to act. And so that's how we move forward. But yeah, so that's kind of the rundown, and that's all I have for y'all. I hope that was helpful.
Very helpful, Cedric. So we're coming up on where we need to close, and you guys hung in for almost 90 minutes strong, and I truly appreciate that. But and to segue off of one thing that came up that Cedric just spoke on, that came up earlier, which is how do we handle the police force? I mean, it goes without saying that you can fight fire with fire and you'll burn everything down. But if you start fighting the fight that we need to in the spaces we need to fight, we need to fight in the church and in the spiritual realm. If you're a pastor and you're not speaking on this stuff, then you're not speaking what God wants you to speak on. That makes a false prophet. So we need to fight these things in the church, and we fight these things in our homes by educating our children, by having the conversations. And Marcus made a comment earlier in the forum that we need to stop talking to kids about this like they're kids. We need to start talking to the kids about this like they're adults. We put it on their level, but we don't hide the adult truth from them about this, because they are the next generation who has the opportunity to actually drive this change. And then one of the third point I want to make that's very important is we have to vote. And it's not just about voting at the presidential and the federal level. It's not about voting at the congressional level and the Senate level. We can make the most immediate impact by voting at the civic and local level first. And if that means we need to become active and go to our city council meetings, be familiar with your city councilman, be familiar with your mayor. In a city like Dallas, it's hard, but let's just be real. Most of us live in some suburban areas. It's a little easier there. But if you start to get active and educate yourself on government and educate others on civic government and the importance of voting at the civic level, you can then start to make the push that needs to be pushed to push for some type of prosecution on these police, or push for reform in your local police system, right? And as that ball starts to roll and grow, we can then start to press on the laws that Cedric just spoke about and start to create change there. the whole point of this is everyone feels that they need to do something. Not everyone is going to be a political activist who goes out and marches every night and protests every night. Not everyone is going to be someone who stands on Capitol Hill. You know, God gives us all an assignment. We stick to our assignment. But if we're going to talk about grassroots movements, we have to start to talk about how we structure our seeding to even get the grass to grow so that we can start that movement. And that starts at home, it starts in the church, and it starts with your actions at a local government level. So whether you are a mentor, teacher, educator, parishioner, whatever you are, whatever your role is, the first step to making change is making change within your heart, and let it be an infectious change that infects the person next to you. And hopefully it spreads through there. So I appreciate everybody joining. I appreciate the feedback. If you've got other topics that you'd like to discuss, we'd love to do this again. Please give us the information that you'd like to discuss. We've been going a million different ways with this. We had to cut this down tremendously, but I appreciate you guys hanging in. I love all of you guys, whether I know you or not. And Cedric, I'm going to toss it to you for your final closeout.
Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Before Ken and I started this, we were saying, I mean, I've been in court and stuff, and he's been in corporate America, and we were nervous, man. We were really nervous to do this because this has caused us to step outside of our comfort zones. But what I'll say is, in a post that I said earlier, is just use the talents that God gave you to make the most of this situation. And if you do that, if we do that in small groups, eventually the web grows, right? And so a web is made one connection at a time. So right now we have up to 41 connections on this call this evening. And now you guys will go and matriculate into your neighborhoods and your friends and your family and start having these conversations. I sincerely hope that you got something that was beneficial from this. I know the private feedback has been awesome. Feel free to send me an email, info@craineylaw.com. I put it in the chat. I'll go ahead and do it one more time. If you have any topics that you would like to talk about, or people, professionals that you would like to have come on, maybe community organizers, et cetera, just send us that feedback. If you know someone that you think would be great for this forum, I think this was such a success that maybe in the future we could do it again. And as we start going, not only talk from an educational piece, but then we start moving from a grassroots movement piece. And we start forming, maybe we start forming committees to make change. So this is just the beginning. It couldn't have been better. Thank you so much, everyone. Be safe and God bless.
Thank you.